My new course is available now. It's called Instructions to Inner Peace, Finding Equanimity and Healing Through an Organized Practice of Ho'oponopono. Now, this course is for anyone with anxiety, depression, PTSD, anger, self-worth issues, or for any spiritual seeker who wishes to raise their consciousness. Ho'oponopono, or as many people who have taken the course call it, HPO, means to correct errors. It's the ancient Hawaiian technique of cleaning unwanted thought patterns, taking responsibility for your emotions, and raising your frequency for love. I've organized it into a daily practice for you. Check out the link below or go to www.peaceoverpain.com, enter the cyber clinic, and purchase this audio course for a very affordable cost. Give it a shot, see if it's for you, and please let me know how it turns out.
Welcome to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese, a program that can help you become liberated in the modern world. Now, here's your host, Dr. Kevin W. Reese.
Have you ever tried to Nofap and reclaim your sexual energy? Welcome to episode number 133. Today, I'm sitting down to talk to Alex Shalier. He's a consciousness coach and YouTuber with a specialty in self-inquiry and sexual transmutation. So sit down and relax and take in this beautiful and important conversation. Let's begin. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, Kevin.
So what's Nofap?
Abstinence from pornography, masturbation, orgasm for a period of time. There are different levels to it, shall we say. In the whole Nofap community, they talk about easy mode, which is also, having intercourse, but refraining from pornography, refraining from masturbation, mostly with pornography. Or some people like to do something that they might call hard mode, which is also refraining from intercourse for a period of time as well. And it really came about to empower men to reclaim their sexual energy and to reclaim their sexual vitality, because obviously a lot of men, and especially a lot of young boys, men of all ages, are getting into serious problems with pornography and ending up with things like erectile dysfunction, performance anxiety, and lapses of confidence with women. But it's not just men. I think it kind of started in that realm, but a lot of women are also discovering the same kind of discovering the same benefits from having these periods of abstinence, and especially stepping away from pornography or certain types of self-pleasure. Me personally, just to put it out there right now, I'm not against any form of conscious masturbation, sex. I think it's very, very healthy to masturbate and to have sex.
Yeah.
What Nofap really is about transcending the unhealthy aspects that people are finding trouble with nowadays. And one way of doing that for a lot of people, and they're finding their ability to reclaim that power, is in at least having a period of time where they actually step away from it and see for themselves how that affects their energy, how that affects their biology and their performance, and how they feel about their sexual prowess and energy. So I think that's Nofap in a nutshell.
So would it be when we have orgasm, we're leaking our energy? Is that the basis of it?
I don't think it's always a leak of energy, in the sense that there are conscious sexual practices out there, for example, Taoist sexual practices, which had been, designed to reclaim and circulate that energy. However, most people out there aren't engaging in these advanced sexual practices. Most people out there are finding problems with this and finding relief in things like Nofap and sex transmutation. They are mostly engaging with pornography, and there's a massive difference in what's happening just in your experience. There's a big difference between engaging in pornography and, for example, engaging in real conscious intercourse with someone that you really love. And I think in the case of engaging in pornography and regularly masturbating to pornography, then yes, it does appear to be, for most people, a huge release of energy. And there's obviously limited scientific studies on this. However, it seems to be undeniable now, especially as you have hundreds of thousands of people on forums, on YouTube, different social media platforms, and reporting the same effect, reporting this sort of lower state of energy, this brain fog, this lack of clarity, this lack of vitality that seems to creep in when they repeatedly engage with pornography, especially, and the reversal of that starts to appear when they abstain. This energy does appear to build up. This brain fog does seem to clear. This, and whether it's, you look at it through an esoteric lens of shooting out sexual energy, or you look at it from a more scientific lens of like you're really elevating, you're super elevating those levels of dopamine. And we know if you spike dopamine then very high, then the baseline then lowers afterwards. Cocaine addicts get the same effect. Anybody that keeps spiking their dopamine, we find ourselves drained and sometimes on the extreme end depressed afterwards. So yeah, it's really, whatever lens you look at it through, people are definitely reclaiming their power and finding these benefits of reclaiming their energy and vitality and clarity through these periods of abstinence, for sure.
What does NoFap stand for?
Well, I think it's just, I remember when I first heard of it, because in the UK, we call it a wank, but apparently in the US, they call it a fap. Masturbation is fapping. I didn't know that. I was like, okay, but yeah, so it's just no masturbation. That's all it means.
Okay, so whether male or female, pornography is addicting, period. These images, this experience, it gets imported into our subconscious mind. Anything we watch really does, right? A horror movie, whatever, the news. I have had doctor colleagues that have said that there's an explosion of young men between the ages of 17 to 25 that need Cialis and Viagra and all this stuff because they have erectile dysfunction, like you said. Is this because you can get porn right on your phone? I mean, it's so accessible. I mean, when I was a kid, I had to steal a VHS tape from dad, Not so much anymore, is it?
I think it's more than likely to be the case that this epidemic of erectile dysfunction is due to the epidemic of pornography. It's been the case. It was the case in my experience. It was the case in countless people that I've talked to, countless people I've seen on the internet, and people that I've also worked with, and not just up to the ages of 25, up to the ages of 50, or perhaps perhaps older. And I was also very surprised that the people that come to me because I do have some content out there on this, and so then people may book a call with me off the back of that. I expected it to be mostly men when I first put it out there, but actually I've been getting about 50% women there as well. However, in terms of like erectile dysfunction, obviously that's exclusively a male problem. But I mean, I can just tell you that I had a period of my life where I was engaging in pornography quite a lot. And this is actually how I discovered Nofap to begin with, is that I was trying to have real sexual interactions on dates and finding myself with performance anxiety and finding myself, it just didn't, my brain just didn't feel right. I think the point I discovered this, I had been through a breakup where I had been having, there was a long relationship. And so I'd been engaged in, like I had a fairly healthy sexual relationship for a long time. But then after that breakup, when you're single and then there's only, you feel maybe that there's only pornography as that sort of sexual outlet or that way of getting pleasure in that way, I got myself into a little bit of a hole with it, only to discover that was the problem when finding myself not being able to perform how I really wanted to in real human sexual interaction. So I went to Google, like, what's going on? Like what performance anxiety, what's the cause of it? And through that Googling, I discovered the whole Nofap community. And then the good thing is that it's like you can discover it based off of that problem that you discover yourself to have, that suffering. But then this whole world opens up when you realize, when you start having periods of abstinence from the pornography, and the amount of energy that you reclaim, the amount of vitality and clarity you reclaim. I remember at first I felt like it was a kind of superpower. I remember saying to people, I've done all these different personal development techniques, from the Wim Hof method to breathing to yoga and exercise and supplements and everything, but I don't know any other personal development practice that has had more of an profound effect than this. The difference in feeling from being repeatedly engaging in pornography to being 30, 40, 50, 60 days into a streak of abstinence is like night and day. And so many people, men and women, will tell you that and tell you about the difference they feel in their body and mind.
Yeah. With performance anxiety, I've always said that when we engage in pornography over and over again, our expectation kind of rises, and that becomes the new bar of your sexual fantasy. And then you get with a real woman, and she may not be either shaped like that, or she might not be as freaky as that, or whatever the case is. And then your desire isn't met based on the images that have been downloaded into your mind. Does that play a factor in the performance anxiety and erectile dysfunction as well?
Absolutely. I think it's even more multifaceted than that, because a lot like a very dopaminergic drug, people often find themselves slipping into a hole where they need more, or they need more extreme versions of the same thing to get the same stimulation. So a lot of people find that they'll start on, very vanilla kind of porn, but they'll gradually move to more and more deviant kind of stuff, because the more vanilla stuff doesn't seem to stimulate them in the same way. And we know from neuroscience that pornography stimulates dopamine, this neurochemical that biases us for action, is so high to the levels of, for example, cocaine. And we know that if we spike the dopamine that high, we get this lowering of the baseline afterwards. And so then the person feels that they have to spike it again, even higher, just to get back to that same place, you see. And so the images that people are using become more and more novel and more customized. And obviously, when we are entering the world of the digital world of pornography, then the array of novelty that you can potentially have is limitless, and the definition and the speed of it is increasing every year. You know, our internet gets better and faster every year. The videos become high resolution. Now there's virtual reality, and so yes, absolutely, you're able to satisfy such a wide variety and of novelty visually. However, the experience of you being there on your own with a visual image versus a real human interaction is just completely different experience, in the sense of, with pornography, it's just usually just purely visual. And with a real person, you've got pheromones, you've got smells, you've got touch, you've got real human interaction. There's and all everything that plays out within that, and the social dynamics, and this whole other world that produces also a whole other cocktail of neurochemistry. And so, you know, when it comes to the pornography, it's I feel like it's mostly just like this dopaminergic spike that you're just able to turn on by stimulating yourself with these images, and just going further down that rabbit hole with those progressively elevating standards and more novelty is where people get themselves into trouble.
Would you say that pornography realistically should be no-go, period? Even though masturbation can be healthy in moderation, but pornography, no-go, zero?
I've thought before about, you know, what does pornography really mean? If you say pornography, you just think of a porn video, but pornography is really just being stimulated by anything, you know, visually. Like someone might use something as pornography that isn't necessarily what you would stereotypically think of as pornography, but they find it turns them on. And I don't think it's a tough one to explain, because I don't think at its baseline, I don't think there's anything wrong with it as such, as long as everybody who's involved in it is consenting. However, realistically, at the point that we are now with the internet and the way the porn industry is, and there's a lot of things within the porn industry that people think are very problematic for good reason, and just the accessibility of it, the lack of education around the potential dangers of it, the accessibility of it, especially for young people who may not have the education or awareness or sort of self-control to be able to engage in it healthily. I would say on the large part that, yeah, pornography for the most part in this current situation we have now is overwhelmingly destructive. Does that mean on a philosophical level that it's a bad thing? Right. Maybe not, but realistically, the way it is, the way the industry is, and the way people are engaging with it, it's something that if you just avoided your whole life, it would probably cause you less problem than more. It's
a slippery slope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so before we leave this topic, I want to also mention that, you know, I'm a big Osho guy, you know, the Bhagwan, you know, and many times in his discourses, he's done topics on sex, Tantra. And it was one of his main teachings that the orgasm is a very big spiritual event, if you will, a moment. as close to enlightenment as you can get without, you know, it actually happening, you know. And he, you know, would promote two people coming together and being able to consciously create this moment, this ecstasy. And he would say the real orgasm is after the orgasm. When you're laying there with your partner and, you know, you're in that bliss. And so under that notion, you know, sex can be a really good thing, right? Conscious sex.
I think this is the key word here, is conscious. Is it conscious? Because a lot of the time when we're engaging with pornography, it is unconscious in the fact that we're often self-soothing, and a lot of people are self-soothing some kind of pain. A conscious sexual act with an intimate partner in a conscious relationship is completely different from an unconscious self-soothing of pain through pornography.
Yeah, absolutely. Or perhaps jumping from partner to partner and being obsessed with having sex. You know, I've known plenty of guys in my day that they get to these astronomical notch counts. You know, they're in the hundreds, they're in the 200s. I mean, they're Wilt Chamberlain, if that's a verb somewhere. You know, I mean, they're just collecting sexual experiences like it's baseball cards or something. And so that could be lower consciousness too, right?
Well, hopping around on Tinder for your life to get your next fix can be just as much of an unconscious activity as hopping around different porn sites.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from this topic. So the whole reason that I even know who you are is because about a year ago, I went into we'll call it a spiritual cleanse, which most people call dark night of the soul. And in this misery, of course, I'm on YouTube looking around and I found your video on dark night of the soul. That was my first introduction to you. So how was your experience?
Which one? Which one?
Never easy.
The beauty of suffering is that it can point you back towards yourself. The dark night of the soul is how was my experience was the question, wasn't it?
It's okay. You go wherever you go.
When experiencing something that we might define as the dark night of the soul, this inner turmoil that seemingly comes out of nowhere, or maybe triggered by a certain kind of spiritual experience, or maybe the breakdown of a relationship, or a career situation, or
loss
a money
of
situation.
control.
Yeah, this seeming loss of control triggers this inner turmoil. The reason why I've spoken on it is because there's a great opportunity in there. For me personally, I had discovered things like non-duality, concepts like non-duality, presence, awareness. And I had really gone on a big spiritual journey myself for many years, into a kind of bliss, being able to transcend my dysfunctional thinking by knowing myself as deeper than it, being able to transcend certain level of anxiety. And I went for a long time thinking Yeah, I'm doing really well here. You know, I must be really elevated here. I must be at a point of high spiritual development here. My ego must have been saying, and then when this turmoil gets triggered, especially in that, it's like, okay, what is this pointing me back towards? What is this enabling me to learn here? And for me personally, it really exposed the places where I was still attached to things. It really exposed certain traumas and beliefs that were still in my system that perhaps I had spiritual bypassed a bit before. Perhaps I had kind of used the presence to elevate myself above, but it's not until a life situation comes along that then triggers those old traumas and triggers those old patterns, that it's like, okay, this spiritual awakening that I went through wasn't a one and done deal. there are deeper layers of this onion that are being peeled back and being revealed. So it really enabled me to go deeper and to be able to see the source of this suffering and the source of these attachments.
Yeah. And you said you've gone through it multiple times.
The biggest catalysts for personal and spiritual growth for me have always started at the darkest moments, because it's in that suffering that creates that catalyst to want to transcend it. It's like when you go to the darkest night, when you go to the deepest pain, it really creates this desire within you to find out the source of your suffering, to find out how to transcend your pain. When you're kind of just ticking along, or you feel like you're generally happy and everything's going quite well, you don't go on these deep spiritual explorations. You don't go on these big personal growth missions because you think you're doing fine. Yeah. When you have these dark nights of the soul, when you have these experiences, and for me, it's mostly been after breakups. So I would say, and one I would say was after a psychedelic experience, a really traumatic psychedelic experience. But those 3 times were the times that really catalyzed going deeper, that really catalyzed finding out the source of my suffering. And through that, I've been able to come to deeper levels of peace and deeper levels of understanding, because I've been shown that I'm still attached to things, that I've still got these traumas in my nervous system, that I've still got these dysfunctional beliefs that are taking me away from who I truly am. And so each dark night has provoked that investigation into who am I really? Am I really these thoughts and these beliefs that are causing this suffering? Am I really these feelings in the nervous system that are disturbing? Am I really a victim to my own circumstance? Or if I turn around, can I find a peace and happiness that's inherent in my being, that is separate from these seemingly dark external circumstances? It's the suffering and the dark night of the soul that forces us to turn around and look at ourselves and find out that that peace and happiness was in ourselves all along, and not in the external situation, which we believe is the source of our suffering.
It's almost like training to die.
It is a kind of death.
You know, I would, I want to ask, do we have to keep going through it though, in order to get to our realized self? Do we have to keep going through these episodes of the so-called dark night of the soul? Or can one be enough to where you get to a daily practice and you just, you know, keep working at it? Because I don't want to go through it again. 7 months. It was 7 months for me. So that's quite long.
I don't think that we have to necessarily. I think that we have the ability to realize and understand deeper aspects of ourselves in any moment. It does appear that our deep suffering is the thing that really catalyzes a deeper investigation in most of us. But it really depends on your conditioning, the traumas that you hold within, the patterns and the beliefs that may still have some kind of momentum. The good news is that once you discover the core of your being as being inherently peaceful, when you experience some kind of dark night of the soul, and maybe it's not one night, maybe it's 7 months, the thing that you can always source some kind of comfort from, and this was my experience, when you discover the peace that you are, is no matter what is happening in your experience with these thoughts and these feelings that are just sometimes hellish and tortuous, in that moment, you can, there is an opportunity to experience yourself as the formless, aware spaciousness within which this turmoil appears.
Yes.
And there's something really, really enlightening and empowering within that, to be able to experience that level of turmoil. You know, when I was having a particularly troublesome time, it felt like my nervous system was being electrocuted from the inside out. It felt like I was being constantly electrocuted. Like every thought in my mind was dark and I just couldn't think anything positively. However, luckily, because I had been exposed to certain teachings before, there was this recognition within me that no matter how torturous this turmoil is, I am this formless space that it appears within. And there's a real opportunity to take a stand as that self, to take a stand as that formless being, to take a stand as you truly are, as this awareness. And so long as you keep taking your stand as yourself and as awareness, that really is ultimately the way out and the prevention of having to go through the dark night of the soul over and over again to realize this. I mean, how much suffering do you need?
My so-called episode actually, for the most part, ended with a Satori. You know, it's just this beautiful 5-6 hours of great awareness. And then it went away. And then I was upset for a few days, but I realized, you know, all right, well, you know, if you see the Buddha, kill the Buddha, right? So, you know, from then on, there wasn't much suffering. It was just an ongoing practice of chipping away at these belief systems, chipping away at these expectations. Ultimately, just chipping away at the dream. It's just a dream. You know. So we're all unprogramming our neuroses. Right?
I think it can also show you new levels of personal and spiritual growth, shall we say, or understanding that you may not have touched on before. For example, I went through one dark night of the soul where I learned that I'm not my thoughts. I learned that I'm not the sense of self in my thinking. And I wouldn't have discovered that unless I went through that experience. I wouldn't have discovered that unless my thoughts got so tortuous that I wanted to escape them. And then because they got so tortuous, I read material like Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira and all these spiritual teachers who give us this awareness that we're more than our thinking. And that we're actually the self, the awareness, the spacious presence within which our thinking arises. So I discovered that through that suffering, and that wouldn't have happened unless I went through that suffering, shall we say.
Right.
However, a few years later, I found myself, being perfectly able to realize that I'm not the sense of self in my thinking, but I'm like, hang on a minute, my nervous system is jacked up to level 11 here, and it feels like I'm being electrocuted and tortured from the inside out. And through that period of suffering, through that dark night of the soul, I learned about being able to regulate the nervous system. I learned about being able to somatically experience the body in a way to reset the nervous system into, out of being chronically overactivated into a sympathetic response, back down to a calming response. And I learned within that as well that I had a lot of anxiety and trauma and fear going on in the background, going on in my nervous system, in my body, that went unnoticed. And although I was able to transcend this fearful thinking, there was still this latent energy trapped in my nervous system, which through that second dark night of the soul, it sent me on another, exploration in, okay, what do I do about this? What do I do about this overactive nervous system? So it can be that you discover a new aspect or a new level on this journey to inner peace.
It's interesting you mentioned the electrical feeling. One of my favorite teachers, Dr. David Hawkins, has mentioned that sometimes awakening hurts.
Mm-hmm.
He mentioned that he had moments where his whole body felt like he was being just shocked. So that just crossed my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Doesn't sound fun.
It's not. I mean, there can be intense physical sensations in the body that arise through many different experiences. I think the beauty of these teachings and understandings is that they teach us that we're more than these sensations. They teach us that we're more than these thoughts. Sometimes we can have experiences where our thoughts and feelings are incredibly intense. And that's why, part of my suggestion to people is to discover themselves as deeper than thoughts and feelings. So especially at these times where they're very, very intense, we know ourselves as deeper than them. We know ourselves as the still, silent spaciousness that they arise within. And it doesn't immediately get rid of the turmoil, but what it does do is enable you to sit back from it. What it does do is enable to really experience yourself as being undisturbed by them. Because however intense your inner turmoil has been, it is in its nature transitory. And when it passes through you, you find that what you essentially are as this aware spaciousness, it was completely untouched. And to know yourself as that awareness and to know yourself as that spaciousness, I would suggest is the path to true inner peace, because it's discovering, it's not necessarily finding inner peace. It's recognizing yourself, and it's recognizing yourself as inherently peaceful. And that is no more obvious than at times when you're experiencing deep suffering and deep turmoil, but at the same time knowing yourself as the undisturbable spaciousness in which this turmoil will eventually leave.
Earlier, you mentioned Rupert Spira, who's been on this podcast, and we had a great discussion. How important has self-inquiry been on your journey?
It's been the most important thing. It's been the most important thing. The two most important things have been being able to somatically experience the body, being able to be with the bodily sensations. So having the attention turned towards the felt sense, the somatic landscape of the body, and being able to be with that so those energies can move and process and release. And then the most important thing on top of that has been turning the attention round towards the self, turning the attention round towards the one who appears to be experiencing, and investigating the nature of one's self. So I mentioned earlier how we're not our thoughts and we're not our feelings. We are this spaciousness that they appear within. If you really investigate it, you'll find that out.
The sky.
And so this self-inquiry is giving awareness to ourselves, being aware of ourselves, and investigating through our own experience, what is the nature of this awareness? What is the nature of ourself? And when we do that investigation, we find ourselves to be inherently peaceful, to be inherently spacious, to be inherently happy. And if you took away every other spiritual or personal development practice, and you could and gave me the choice to only leave one, that would be the one.
That's typically what everyone says.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to be either that or Vipassana.
Mm-hmm.
Those are like the two go-tos for everyone that's been realized.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're saying with the paying attention to the body, that could be considered Vipassana, right? Isn't that
exactly? That's what I was just, yeah.
Yeah, because Vipassana typically would be following the breath, but that's a body sensation, right?
Mm-hmm. In both circumstances, just on its baseline, you're divesting attention from being exclusively contracted down onto the mind and the thinking, which is usually where we are in the default state in this modern society, just listening to our thoughts, talking to ourselves in our head, watching mental movies in the mind. And you're taking some attention away from that and bringing it towards the felt sense of the body, or turning the attention around towards yourself. And you can actually do both at the same time. It's a bit more advanced, but it's possible. And but just to begin with, that is such a helpful thing to be able to do, to be able to just move your attention from being completely consumed by your thinking and this cognitive lens that you see the world through, and bringing some attention to the felt sense of the body and tapping into its innate intelligence. And then combining that, as teachers like Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira both do. They both have meditations which explore the felt sense of the body and turn the attention around on itself to investigate the nature of oneself. So yeah, for me, definitely the combination of these two, I want to say practices as such, but you know, that one of them you could say is a practice, and one of them you could say is an investigation. Just the combination of those two is extremely powerful.
In the self-inquiry process, would you walk it back with questions after question after question, or would you just go right to the who am I or what's aware?
What do you mean by asking the question after question?
Yeah, like asking a question and then shooting the question down, which like, am I a man? No, I'm not a man. I'm something else.
I see.
Am I?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just
I see. Yes.
Walking the questions back until you get to
exactly.
self.
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to here is like there are different ways in which you can go about this. There's what you could call the neti process, discovering what you're not to get to who you are. I think that's what you were alluding to. And the distinction between that and asking a question like, who am I? Which is like a signpost straight back to the self. So I think depending on the person, both paths, it's not an either or thing. Like both paths, or one or the other, may be more helpful, shall we say. You can go through a process of, yes, understanding through your experience, through your own investigation, that my thoughts change and come and go, and there are even spaces between thoughts, but I don't go with them, I remain. And so I cannot essentially be my thoughts. With these feelings, the feelings change and they morph and they come and they go, but I don't come and go, I stay here. So I can't, they can't be essential to who I am. And then you go through all of these objects of experience to find out that they are transitory, to find out that they appear and disappear, but the aware presence within which they appear remains, and you discover yourself to be essentially your essential self, to be that aware presence. So that's one path, shall we say, one level of investigation. And then there are using these self-inquiry questions like, who am I? And that's it's a bit like a signpost. Like the signpost isn't the destination. If you keep on asking the questions, but you don't follow to where they're pointing to, you keep on looking at the signposts without ever following them to their destination. So the questions are only useful in terms of what they actually point you towards. And so when it comes to a question like, who am I? It is pointing you to who you are, not the concepts of who you are, but the one who's aware of those concepts, the one who's aware of your experience, pointing you back towards yourself directly through that one question that Raman Maharshi, I think he came up with it. And there are many other questions like that are just direct pointing back towards the self. So yeah, that's the distinction here. this process of finding out what you're not to get to who you are can be very helpful. And these questions that point you directly back to yourself, giving you the chance to give yourself awareness and investigate the nature of yourself. They can both be very helpful.
Yeah, my mentor used "What's aware?" That was his question. What's aware?
Am I aware?
How long would you do self-inquiry? It's not, is it something that you would do all day as you go through your day, or would you block off some time, like say, all right, I'm going to do it for this hour, like you would a meditation?
Both, in the sense that you can have times where you dedicate to self-inquiry. You can have times where you, for example, sit on your own somewhere in your room, out in nature, wherever you like, and do, do self-inquiry, like how intentionally place, intentionally become aware that you're aware and investigate the nature of yourself, of this awareness. However, you don't want to just be keeping self-inquiry to specific times. The path is about taking a stand as yourself. The path is about taking a stand as awareness, and this applies through your daily life as well. And it's something that something that can occur to you at various points throughout the day. At various points throughout the day, it may occur to you that you're drifting deep into thinking and mental movies, and it occurs to you, come back to myself. And there's this kind of, I always think, like, spiritual awakening, we always think that it's that we seem to think that spiritual awakening is just this like one big event that happens in people's lives, or maybe they go through a few, and that is one type of spiritual awakening. We say, I had a spiritual awakening. You think it's this big monumentous thing. But I like to think that there's actually, you can have hundreds of spiritual awakenings a day. Every time you realize that you're drifting deep into thinking and away from yourself and trying to source happiness from the external world, until you wake up from that dream and realize that you are this aware presence again. And that can, and especially at the beginning of a lot of people's journey with this, that can be something that happens many, many times throughout the day. There's this sort of pendulum swing back and forth between getting lost in the objects of experience, realizing that that's happened. Sometimes it's the suffering, not just the deep suffering, but even just mild suffering can then wake you up to the fact that, hey, I've got off track here. I've come away from myself here. I've got lost in this experience, and it's time to wake up. It's time to come back to myself.
Allow me to share something that's happening right now in my life. My closest aunt has been in the hospital for 5 weeks. Tremendous suffering, right? Just they open heart surgery, and then there's an infection in the blood. It's just like this falling apart physically. And my mother, my father, and my cousin, her daughter, they're in suffering. Sometimes there's even crying, and they're amping each other up. And I'm watching it because I'm a watcher now, right? I'm in higher consciousness. So I'm watching the show in lower consciousness, and I'm watching the suffering happening. And I'm watching them do it to themselves because one calls the other, and there's one story going to the other ear and this story going to the other. And then the worrying and the predicting and the assuming.
Mm-hmm.
And every day they're mourning this woman who hasn't died yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not bothering me at all. It's my closest aunt. It has not touched me at all because I'm choosing to not think about it. And so the awakening there is, it's a choice.
Mm-hmm. It's a choice that can seemingly get more challenging the greater the challenge you're being exposed to in life.
In other words, if I, you, or whoever was her in the hospital,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a big challenge
Mm-hmm.
because it's her story. It's her experience. It's not ours. We're reacting to her experience.
Mm-hmm.
And she's scared to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that I have compassion for
Mm-hmm.
because I don't want to be scared to die.
Mm-hmm.
That's my goal. That's the only goal, is to be on your deathbed with a smile. You know, like, oh, okay, cool. We're about to graduate. We're about to go do something else. Right.
Yeah.
But this woman, the 70-year-old woman, is scared to die. And she's reverting back to, you know, a 5-year-old who thinks there's a monster in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only analogy I can think of.
Life is going to give us the challenges that we need to awaken to ourselves. And the real test, as it were, the real test of our peace, the real test of our so-called awakening is, can we remain as ourselves? Can we remain as this peace when the turmoil jacks up more? Like when we get a chronic illness, when our business falls apart, when our money gets low and we don't know whether we're going to be able to pay the rent, when our partner that we thought really loved us suddenly leaves us, when a family member is ill, someone that we love greatly and we're very attached to, that these episodes, these challenges, this adversity is the real test of our understanding, as it were. And this is the beauty of these, you know, obviously these experiences are not pleasurable, and obviously, you know, I've been through such great pain and suffering in my own life. It's enabled me to have such deep compassion for anybody that's going through any kind of turmoil or adversity, especially, you know, very deep adversity. And there's many people out there that have experienced much more heinous or challenging events than even I have. And so none of this understanding it is devoid of compassion. None of this understanding is just, you know, by saying to bypass the pain or anything like that. But what it is saying is that amongst the pain and the challenge, there is an indisturbable peace at the core of your being, and your ability to stand within that is really tested by these experiences. However, if you can use these experiences, use these challenges and adversity to deepen your understanding, to go deeper into yourself, then they do enable you. There is a kind of grace in them that enables you to discover even deeper levels of peace and deeper levels of understanding, because they really force you in a way to go deeper. They force you. You've got two choices. You disappear into the torturous story about it, you feel completely overwhelmed by the bodily sensations that come out of this, or you and you just completely lose yourself in that, or you turn around and you discover the one who's experiencing this, the silent watcher. You discover the self, the awareness within which this experience arises, and investigate the nature of that, and take a stand as that, which deepens your understanding and deepens your peace.
It's really brilliant. My mentor has been awake for over 20 years, and his son died of bone cancer. 19-year-old son. From high level stuff. Didn't faze him. He helped his son. He had compassion for his son, but the actual death didn't faze him because he's awake. So I had to ask. I was so curious. It's like, how did you handle this? How? And he had two big responses that really stuck with me. The first one was, well, as soon as the diagnosis came in, I accepted his death. And the second one was, after the death, he chose not to think about it, because he had already found his essential self.
Mm-hmm.
His mind is a tool, not, he dictates to his mind, so he has the absolute choice. And so you say, well, you don't think about it.
Mm-hmm.
You don't think about it. There's no emotion. It's brilliant. And that it's hard to get to. It takes a lot of work and maybe some dark nights. But I mean, to be able to come out of that, because they say burying a child's the hardest thing, they say, for the human condition. To be able to come out of that unscathed is like, wow, I don't know how you feel about it. But acceptance is powerful.
The other thing I would say as well is that sometimes when we get to acceptance, sometimes that is just it. We get to this acceptance that stops the narrative in the mind. We realize ourselves as the awareness and not this torturous story. And that is what really helps us to transcend it. Sometimes we transcend the thinking around it, but there is this latent energy in the body, these sensations in the body. I've had times in my own experience where I've realized that I've got way too lost in some thinking about something and an attachment to something, and lost in the story about it, and then reach some level of acceptance, which really is just waking up from that dream and coming back to yourself. And what remains is this intense emotional energy that you can feel in the body, in the felt sense of the body. And so it doesn't always immediately end the pain or end the dense, sometimes uncomfortable energies that are in the body. However, being able to be with those sensations in the body allows them then to process, allows them then to release. Sometimes intense bodily sensations arise in response to something, and we can that's actually an opportunity to purge these energies in the body by being able to just be the aware spaciousness that these sensations appear within, and not not label them, not cover them up with a veil of concepts, but just really be with those raw sensations, really be with the raw felt sense of the body. And then that allows those energies to be processed, to dissolve. And that speaks to this dark night of the soul, is that sometimes with the dark night of the soul, it may be that these extremely intense, uncomfortable body sensations, which are linked to old attachments and old traumas, arise. But the question is are you able just to be with them, no matter how uncomfortable they are? And you don't need to accept them with the mind. You don't really need acceptance when you just realize that you are this spaciousness that they appear within. And then just being that spaciousness, knowing yourself as the undisturbable piece, and then allowing those energies to move through, is another level of release that further aligns your experience of your body with your deeper understanding of this piece.
So before I ask you my last question, where can people come say hello to you and come see your work?
So you can come and see my work on Instagram or YouTube. Just type into the search bar Alex Shalier, Shailer. No one seems to be able to spell it. And you can go to speaktoalex.com if you want to apply to book to speak to me on the phone.
Right. So what are the top 3 most influential books you've ever read?
Wow. I wasn't prepared for this question. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, and Being Aware of Being Aware by Rupert Spira.
Being aware of being aware. That says it all right there. Alex, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Inner Peace with Dr. Reese. If this episode opened your heart, feel free to share on social media and tell your loved ones. Also, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, may peace be with you.